forecasts are shown on pages 69 to 71, and these are refreshed annually. And you can see the figures set out on page 70, which sets out the approved medium-term financial plan that was approved at council in February. And this sets out the forecast budget gap for 23-24 up to 27-28. That is currently being refreshed again for the current year, taking into account the recent inflationary pressures that's been set out that we brought to members in July. And work is ongoing with members around looking at the budget early in preparation for the 23-24 financial year, taking into account recent low inflationary pressures around pay and utility and energy costs. Finally, behind the narrative statement on pages 79 to 83, as reported in the Quarter 4 Performance Report, you have the key performance indicators for the 21-22 year. And then, shall we move on to the main statements of the financial statements that are set out on pages 85 to 91. This starts off with your comprehensive income and expenditure statement on page 85, and this does include a number of non-cash accounting entries that are subsequently reversed out, so they don't impact the bottom line and thus the council taxpayer. These are reversed out through the movement in reserve statement on page 87 and account for £15.3 million worth of transactions. The end result being that there's a zero change in the movement in general fund balance, and therefore, as I set out, that balance remains itself at £1.2 million, which is the cash position of the authority. The movement in reserve statement is set out on pages 86 and 87, and that sets out on page 87 the level of our usable reserves, which is currently at just over £18 million for the 21-22 year. That's down from 20 million at the same point last year, and the difference being that movement in the collection fund reserve. We then have what we call unusable reserves, which deal with some of the accounting entries around our fixed assets and pension fund accounting, and they account for £29 million, and the breakdown of those is shown on pages 135 to 138. This gives us our total net worth of just over £47 million, and that's replicated then on our balance sheet, which starts on page 88. Where we can see at the very bottom, we've got net assets to 47.1 million. That's a £15.2 million increase from the previous year, 2021. I'll just cover off where those main movements have come from. Your long-term assets at the very top, you can see have increased from 97 million up to 120 million. That's growth in relation to asset acquisitions, and also where assets that were under construction have now come into the value within the balance sheets, such as the building of the new leisure centre. So that accounts for £11 million worth of assets accounted within property, plant and equipment, and also the acquisition of Green Lane Shopping Centre at £9 million. Once we take off the depreciation for all of our assets, that brings us down to our overall movement for net assets for the 21-22 year. We then have what we call our net current assets, which is our current assets less our current liabilities on the middle part of the balance sheet. And that's showing a £11 million decrease for the 21-22. That's mainly due to cash held at the end of each financial year. This time last year, we were holding quite a lot of cash in relation to the business grants. The government had forward funded that to the council. We were paying out the business grants, and then we were sat on some quite large cash balances that we then needed to repay back to government at a later stage through the 21-22 year. So our year-end position was showing quite a high level of cash, but it wasn't really our cash to be able to do anything with. We needed to repay that back to government. So then that's shown as a short-term liability. So we've seen a £4 million decrease in cash and cash equivalents, and also £7 million in debtors, and this is to do with that cash flow and monies owed to and from the collection fund in relation to those business grants cash balances held. Our long-term borrowing, about 2/3 of the way down the balance sheet, has increased from £500,000 to just over £3 million. That's an increase of £2.5 million. And our finance lease liability has increased by £1 million, and that's in relation to the new way that we acquire our vehicles through the finance lease contracts with SFS. The big number, 2/3 of the way down, is our defined benefit and pension scheme liability. So this is the long-term pension liability fund, and that net liability, I'm pleased to see, has decreased by £7 million. This fluctuates year on year. It's made good by future contributions into the pension fund, and it's offset by an unusable reserve lower down the balance sheet. And it's revalued every 3 years, and it takes into account the assets returns, the long-term liabilities, And also it takes into account changes in financial assumptions around discount rates used, pension increase assumptions, how long people are expected to live for, and also expectations on salary increases over the short term. The fund liabilities in the pension fund have decreased by £2 million. Positively, the fund assets have increased by £5 million. So that accounts for the net movement of the £7 million. Further breakdown of that within the pension fund note on page 42, in note 42 on pages 149 and 154. That also sets out within that note a breakdown of the fund history over the last 5 years. So you can see how that pension fund liability has changed over that short-term period. The pension deficit that is set out is made good by the increased contributions over the remaining working life of all of the employees. So it is taking that longer-term view in terms of the working employees over the next 40 to 50 years will make good the deficit within the pension fund and deal with the outgoings in terms of the expected liabilities over that same period. Chair, that explains the balance sheet. The remaining couple of statements within the statement of accounts, the main statements are your cash flow statement on page 89, and that just sets out how the council generates and uses its cash and cash equivalents. And then finally, one is the collection fund, because we're the billing authority for council tax and business rates. We show the overall position in terms of the business rates and council tax bills that we collect and how that is then apportioned and paid out to the various major preceptors. The next chunk within the accounts from pages 92 to 111 are your accounting policies. They're the rules and concepts in how we prepare the accounts. And I'm pleased to say there's no material changes in those for the 21-22 year. So unless you want to delve into those in any detail, then I'll let you read those at your leisure. And then the big chunk of the rest of the accounts are just the notes to the accounts that break down those main statements into a bit more detail. So you'll see on the main statements, they refer to a note number. That next 40 or 50 pages just breaks down those notes to the accounts, so you can see those numbers broken down into a bit more detail. And then finally, at the very back of the report, on page 162 to 168, you have the draft auditors report. So that's the draft auditors report as it is at the moment, and that just sets out what they're expecting to put into their final report that comes forwards. As I said, you'll hear the audit findings report on your next item, and that will conclude with their draft opinion. The opinion at the moment sets out, as I said, an unqualified opinion in terms of the financial statements. It does also set out on page 168 the delay in certification of completion of the audit, because some of that work is still currently ongoing, albeit a large majority of the audit has taken place, hence why the auditors are happy to bring the audit findings report this evening to give you their conclusion on the audit as it is at the moment. But one element of the audit is around the value for money conclusion, and that's to confirm that the authority's arrangements for securing economy, efficiency and effectiveness in the use of our resources, that work is delayed, but that will be completed by the time we have to submit our final sign-off to government that the audit has taken place. But the auditors will explain about that as part of their next report. So, Chair, that concludes the statement of accounts for 21-22. Happy to take any questions, and the recommendation is that you approve the draft accounts to go on to full council for Wednesday night for approval and sign off by the chair and the chief financial officer.
Chair, thank you very much, Councillor Duffy. Happy to propose. Happy to propose. Any other questions from Councillor Anderson?
Yeah, might be worth John offering Devon Council alone, given the position of North Devon councillors. Should we say that? Should I? John, just a quick question. On the salary savings, you mentioned salary savings 225,000 on page 73. And are those actual true savings, or are they actually budgeted figures?
So we budget for vacancy savings as part of our normal annual budget, because there's always timings of the year where posts become vacant and they sometimes take a month or two to fill. So there are always annual vacancy savings that we expect. What we've seen is actually some of those recruitments have taken slightly longer. Obviously, the recruitment market has been quite challenging over the last year in terms of getting applicants. So the higher vacancy savings has come about over and above what we expected.
Perfect, thank you. Thanks, Jane.
Thank you. Councillor Wood.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, just a question about the pensions, John. At the moment, you've got the defined benefits pension scheme in place. I think I heard something about the proposal from the government to introduce the defined contribution scheme as a the public sector. I just wondered, the viability of that as opposed to the viability of the existing scheme we've got in place. Are we looking to reach those objectives with the existing scheme?
So the existing scheme changed in 2014. It was previously a defined salary scheme. There were changes in 2014 that changed that to the sort of average earnings over that period. So obviously that did change for members from 2014. At the moment, we've got the 3-year review of the existing scheme coming up in the autumn at the moment. So in about a month's time, we'll hear from the pension fund what the expected contributions are for the next 3 years. So at that point, we'll have a better understanding in terms of the existing value of the scheme and what the expectations are for the next 3 years. Obviously, as we saw from last year, there's been better returns on assets and reduced liabilities. So that trend does continue. But I suspect there have been some quite good fluctuations in the market, and obviously some of those projections now are likely to be probably another day to the other way. So that's why they assess it every 3 years.
So when will we know the result of the assessment?
We'll know, we hope to know by the beginning of November. So we will go down to Exeter and meet with the pension fund. I think it's about the first week of November. And then by the end of November, we should know the evaluation and what our expected contributions will be then for the next 3 financial years. So that will then feed into our budget setting. But then obviously we get to see sort of January, February, 10th. Thank you.
Any questions from anyone?
Or just, John, you mentioned about vehicle leasing. Is that a new arrangement with the company?
Yeah, so it came in October last year. So previously we would buy vehicles through the capital programme. Those vehicles were funded through borrowing, dominantly borrowing. So we've now entered into finances through SFS, who are the company who are now running our workshop. The benefit of that hopefully gives us a better access to vehicles because we're leasing them and they're much bigger companies, which means they've got access to companies like the road grips that we have with the curbside recycling. And because as an organisation, they have a number of vehicles already into their build times, it means we've hopefully got an earlier access to those vehicles. Whereas if we went to road equipped, potentially the delay could be sort of 18 months before we get a vehicle. So because we were funding the vehicles through borrowing anyway, finance leases is just an alternative way of borrowing for those vehicles.
Is it costing more to do the finance lease, or is it more or less the same?
It's more or less the same. It's quite hard to judge because of the timings of when the vehicles come and what the capital cost would have been. So it's not costing us significantly more. It just gives us also a better availability of vehicles because part of the cost before would have been vehicle delays, more breakdowns, less vehicles available for the crews, which then would mean they're working longer in the day, incurring more overtime. So looking at the bigger picture, it's more cost effective to us.
I'm sure all councillors probably have questions that I don't get. Sort of couple sent a few rich vans parked up there. I can just imagine people saying, "Oh, I went around a bin's collected, but I drive around in brand new vehicle." I can just see that kind of saying. It's just for my own mind, maybe for other councillors, that actually going for the vehicle is, I get that, I really get that, means that the council isn't having to borrow money to fund it. So if you may explain where around that, it's actually not costing any more.
It's not costing any more than the way we were procuring before. It gives us a better supply of vehicles. The availability of vehicles isn't the driver behind why we're making those connections. That's down to availability of drivers and just the market in terms of being able to make sure we can get the results for vehicles.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Busher.
I think that perhaps this is something from the old council where they try to make the books look good by not, say, buy 1 or 2 vans a year. Instead, we're buying second-hand things which somebody else already deems to be a liability. So we've been forced into the fact that we needed to buy all new lorries rather than just replace one each year. Is that not correct? And why we've had to basically renew the entire fleet all in one shot?
We brought the service back in 2000. We talk about the curbside recycling ones. We brought the service back in house 2008. Bought a number of vehicles as part of that service going back in. Those vehicles then were replaced in 2013, but they all replaced at the same time. So what you then find is that the life of those vehicles is predominantly the same. So because you've done that once earlier on in the cycle, chances are then you're replacing quite a significant amount at the same time again. The finance lease arrangement has looked to try and just spread that replacement now so that they're not all coming on at the same point. Some of the vehicles are in better condition than others. So the optimum time to replace is now being worked on as part of that finance lease. So it gives us availability and a better supply of vehicles. And we hope to then spread that out over a longer period of time. So if at any point in the future we went back from leasing to buying, then we wouldn't be all of a sudden faced with having to replace 15 vehicles within the day.
Thank you. Sounds like a good way out of a sticky situation, and also gives us the opportunity to change the model in the future without a massive shock to the finances.
It does also provide us with that flexibility in the future if we can go to electric vehicles and stuff like that. So it should enable us to be more responsive to those changes.
Right. Any more questions? No. Well, I think we've had the independent auditors report, which is recommended that they've been properly prepared in accordance with the local authority accounting in the United Kingdom 21-22. And we've also need to be aware that we have made decisions that have actually minimised the gap this year. So we're actually not too bad off with the actual finances of the council this year. But please be prudent that the work of all members for the benefit of North Devon residents. You've got the figures on page 70 of your report, which states the gaps for 23-24 onwards to 27-28, which are projected, and it's those that we've got to be mindful of going forward, and looking at those, at reducing that. Which members, I know you're all invited to the workshops to have input in looking at what services we need to carry on going forward. But luckily this year, due to what's been explained in that report by Chief Finance Officer, is that we've been in a position where we can sort of balance the books this year, but it's more after 23-24 going forward that we need to be mindful of. So it's been proposed by Councillor Bushell that we forward this draft report and account to full council on Wednesday for approval by full council. Do I have a seconder for that, please? Councillor Henderson, thank you very much. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. Thank you. Item 9, external audit findings report, pages 169 to 208. Report by Grant Thornton. Have we got Peter? Hiya, Peter. Peter Burton.
Good evening, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. So this is the audit findings report that sets out our findings for our 21-22 audit as of the 15th of September. So just to remind the committee members, our responsibilities are twofold. As your external auditors, it's an opinion on your financial statements, and it's a VFM conclusion. Chair, if I start with the opinion, as I said, and as set out in the report, the post-statements visit started in July this year in accordance with our original timetable. The audits now are much more involved than they used to be, and they do involve significantly more time on our part, and as a consequence, they are more demanding for your finance team. My reflection is, yet again, as I've probably said in previous years, is that through good cooperation on both sides, we are now very well progressed. I think this year has been facilitated particularly through the hybrid approach that we've adopted, which is a combination of on-site work involving your finance team, but also remote working as well. So I just wanted to sort of put on record thanks to your finance staff for their flexibility in accommodating that approach. In terms of the opinion findings, my summary is set out on page 171 of your papers. And as I said at the time of drafting this report last week, our work was substantially complete. Since then, we've made further progress in a number of areas, and I will outline that in a bit more detail shortly. Importantly for members of this committee, the Governance Committee, to date, no matters of a material nature have been identified. So we've not found any material errors or uncertainties. You will see, for those that have read the detail, probably the main issue arising from our work to date is in relation to the bank reconciliations, an internal control weakness there. And once again, I'll refer to that in a bit more detail when I go through the detailed findings. So the audit has progressed well. There is still some work that we need to do. Probably the most critical of those areas is property, plant and equipment and investment properties. These are very large figures at the top of your balance sheet, and they take an inordinate amount of time to complete. We've done lots of work in this area, no issues arising to date, but there is a bit more work that we need to do in both of those areas. And as with previous years, again, one other key area for us before we can sign off the accounts is the receipt of the letter of assurance from the auditor of Devon Pension Fund. This was the same last year. That work by the pension fund auditor continues, and we're now expecting that letter in October. So on the basis of us completing the property, plant and equipment and investment property work and the receipt of that letter, it is our intention to give an unqualified opinion on your 21-22 accounts. And I suppose the rest of the detailed report that I've put on the papers today should be read in that context. Just a bit of other context as well. As a firm, we audit 40 plus audits in the Southwest, 40 plus local government bodies. You are probably one of the most well progressed of those audits for 21-22. As in previous years, we have prioritised North Devon District Council, and therefore we are well placed to sign off shortly, and importantly for you, well ahead of the deadline that John outlined earlier as being the end of November for the opinion this year. So as I said, the report should be read in that context, but Chair, with your permission, I'll just go through and pick out some of the key pertinent points within the detail. So just on 173, on page 173, I did, as of last week, set out a number of areas that we were to include on the right-hand side. I'm just looking down that now. And I think I've explained it earlier. It really is now just a case of the pension fund auditor letter, property, plants and equipment and investment properties. There's also things like the final review by Andy as the manager and myself as the engagement lead, and some closing procedures. But really, we've made some pretty good progress in the last week or so. And as I said, we're really on the home straight now. In terms of page 174, you'll see on page 174 we set out our materiality, and when I presented the plan to this committee early in the year, I talked about an overall headline materiality of £1 million. On the receipt of the draft accounts, we did look at your spend and we did increase that slightly. So when I do come to sign the accounts early next month, I won't be signing it to the penny. I'll be signing to say they're correct or within that high level threshold of £1.08 million. What do? Well, we reconcile everything in your accounts, all notes or narrative or primary statements back to something. Most of that is the general ledger and the trial balance, but we will undertake additional audit procedures on any balance, any entry in your primary statements over that materiality figure of 1.08 million. And for some areas that we deem to be significant risks, we will go into even more detail. So in our report on pages 175 all the way through to 178, we summarised the outcome of the work in relation to those significant areas. Page 175 talks about journals. We spend an awful lot of time reviewing your journal processes. Journals are a very good way, should you wish to do so, to move monies between account codes, cost centres, or dare I say financial years. So we undertake, we use a bit of software to drill down into all your journals, of which you have thousands, identify those that look the most risky from an audit perspective and test them. Pleased to be able to report that the testing of those journals did not identify any that were inappropriate. You will see actually at the bottom of that page, we do refer to the issue that we've referred to for a number of years now, which probably reflects the size of the organisation and the separation of duties issues there about journal authorisation. And clearly the response from management in relation to that is consistent with previous years. Page 177 talks about the pension fund auditor and the fact that we await that work. And page 178 talks about property, plants and equipment in investment properties. And John did, as part of his intro to the accounts, refer to a number of additions to the top half of your balance sheet in those areas that clearly we have been focusing on as part of our testing in that area. I did briefly reference in my intro to the one control weakness, internal control weakness that was identified in year. So that's set out in a bit more detail on page 182, where we talk about the cash and bank reconciliation. Clearly, this is an area where we would strongly encourage the council to address this area. And further down in the appendix in our report on page 193 is management's response to our recommendation in this area. So, Chair, that's probably as far as I wanted to go in terms of detail on the opinion. Just to sort of complete the other areas, value for money, as in previous years, we are working to a later deadline for that. The normal target is 3 months from signing the opinion. I've been discussing this with Andy as the manager, and we continue to work to aim to complete that work by Christmas. That said, there is a little bit of detail in this report in relation to the one area that we are focusing on, which was the commercialisation strategy. Suffice to say that we will be reporting fully on that area and the other areas that we're required to report on under the NAO code when we issue our auditor's annual report, as I said, hopefully in the next few months. So probably finally, the only other area I wanted to cover was the area of fees. So on page 196 and on the following page on 197 in a bit more detail are our fee proposals for the year. The indicative fee, as set out on page 196, was just over 63,000, and that compared to an actual fee from last year of 58,000. The increase really reflected a £5,000 amount that had been included, that we'd included initially on all our councils to reflect the additional work required by working remotely. Following discussions with the finance team, we did agree, as I said earlier, to work on site a number of days each week. That worked really well, I thought, and on that basis we have then reflected on that, removed that £5,000, and you'll see that the proposed final fee is back to £58,100, which is a £100 uplift on the final figure for 2021. So that hopefully explains the movement there in that part of our report. Chair, I'm probably minded to stop there, but I'm happy to take any questions on the detail.
Thank you, Peter. Good summary of the report presented to us. Councillor Bushell.
I think on behalf of this committee, we should have our senior managers convey our gratitude for the level at which they're working with the auditors, following the words that Grant Thornton have given us about how much help we offer. I think it's a testament to the team, and even where they did have issues with the reconciliation. I believe that we've had a full answer, and I'm sure that with John's work in the helm, now these software problems have been overcome, it won't be a recurring thing for future audits.
Yeah, I'll pass that back to the team. Obviously, Tony and the team have pulled the accounts together this year, and the bank reconciliation issue has now hopefully been resolved. Like we said in the management response, it wasn't a material balance that was outstanding, but obviously we do aim to reconcile to the penny. So that's been picked up through the team, and they'll make sure that's rectified on a monthly basis. So yeah, thank you for that, and we'll pass that down through the team. And as Peter said, obviously the relationship between us and Grant Thornton has worked really well, and the on-site work has really benefited the team this year on both parties. So that's worked really well. Hopefully sets the tone for next year's audit as well.
Thank you. Peter, I've got a question. You alluded to it slightly in your report, but the commercialisation strategy, which obviously I'm the lead member for, is the work of the auditor. Obviously, it presents its own new challenges, taking on green lanes like we have. From an auditor's point of view, what does that mean within your work time frame? Because obviously, if you ask them to be, we're increasing our portfolio, obviously that will be reflected in fees of work from auditors. And I'm just wondering how much more work that would actually give you as an auditor to satisfy yourselves on the statement of account.
So in terms of the opinion on the financial statements, clearly, you know, if I went back many years, you know, most councils were risk averse. You know, if I went back to when I started 30 years ago, there was plenty of money in local government. There was probably plenty of money in local government 15 years ago. And, you know, you had revenue support grant and council tax and business rates would probably do it, you know, in terms of providing sufficient monies to deliver services. Things have changed, you know, year after year, compound impact of austerity. You know, the days of councils being risk adverse, you know, keeping whatever money they've got in bank accounts generating very little income are gone. You know, RSG, revenue support grant, is long gone. You know, councils are having to go from being risk adverse to risk aware. There is a clear recognition that some councils more than others are needing to act more urgently to generate other sources of income to replace some of those historic ones that are disappearing fast. You know, so, you know, the importance of having a wider source of income and taking proportionate informed risk is an important step for councils to take, depending on your financial position. In terms of, and you are doing that and you're embarking on it. Some haven't embarked on it, but most have. Some have probably, in my view, taken it much too far and have been publicly shamed for that, and found have, you know, fallen foul of some of the decisions that have been made. You know, I think it's fair to say that councils are being strongly discouraged from investing out of area, you know, and being encouraged to, if they are going to go down this route, looking to combine, you know, income generation and capital appreciation with the wider role of the council in terms of its aspirations and regeneration, etc. You know, you do have investment properties that are held purely for, you know, an investment property, which you do, and you do have some of these in your accounts, are held purely for capital appreciation and or revenue generation. But, you know, there's a lot that aren't as well, that are part of, you know, facilitating your aspirations. In terms of the accounts, that doesn't cause me a lot more problem. You know, I will value them. We will look how you valued them and whether it's been valued on the right basis. We will look at how the income's recognised in the accounts. Doesn't create an awful lot more work for us. On the value for money side, we then have to comment on your financial resilience, your informed decision making, etc. And that's where we, for example, will be, future tense, when we issue our VFM work, be commenting on, you know, how you have delivered against what you set out in your business plans in relation to these acquisitions, you know, whether how that impacts on your MTFP and whether, you know, that is a robust reflection of likely income and expenditure, and whether that ensures financial sustainability. So we will still be looking at that, and that will be a particular area of focus this year because that's what I said we would do in the plan. But we're probably doing that in most councils because that's what most councils are having to do. They're having to look at new ways of generating income to replenish those areas that they no longer get many years ago. So, Chair, I'm not sure if I've answered your question there, but probably not a lot more work.
Right, okay. You've answered it. You've answered it in the last sentence. Thank you.
Sorry.
It's all right, but no, that's a real good thing, and I concur. So, any more questions from councillors? No. So I think the external audit findings report. Can we have somebody to move that we accept that? Yeah, in a minute. Thank you, Councillor Walker, Councillor Bushell. All in favour? Thank you very much. Item 10, letter of representation. Thank you, Peter, by the way. Item 10, letter of representation, pages 209 to 212. Chief Finance Officer to report.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Members, this is a quicker item, we're pleased to know. This is the final piece of the jigsaw in terms of the conclusion of the statements and also the audit work, and is a letter that we as a council approved to send back to Peter and the team at Grant Thornton, and it just sets out that we as a council have fulfilled all of our responsibilities in terms of preparing the financial statements. It complies that sets out that we've complied with all the requirements of the various statutory directions and codes that obviously we have to in terms of preparing the financial statements. It also reflects in terms of the governance arrangements in place and links with the annual governance statement that the head of governance presented earlier. It also sets out information we've provided to the auditors and that we've disclosed everything within the financial statements to the best of our ability. And then subject to approval this evening, this letter then goes on to full council on Wednesday night and subject to approval by all members. Then you approve that myself as Chief Finance Officer and Councillor Hunt as the Chair sign this letter and return that back to Peter and the team at Grant Thornton, which when they've concluded the audit, they then use this letter as our final sign off that we've provided everything that they have requested from us.
Thank you. So I'll move from the chair that we go ahead and approve this so that the chair and the Chief Finance Officer, Chairman of Council, shall say, and the Chief Financial Officer does this letter of representation presented to full council on Wednesday. Now, a second, Councillor Walker. All in favour? Councillor Bushell, all in favour? Thank you. Right, excellent. Thank you. That's carried. Item 11, compensation payments made under delegated powers, pages 213 to 218. Report by Senior Communications and Feedback Officer attached.
I'll pick that one up, Chair. So members, this is a report that comes to you every year. It sets out the level of compensation payments that the council have made to customers. In previous years, some of these have run into thousands. This time last year it was £595 for the year before. Pleased to report that's come down slightly. It's now £561 that was paid out in compensation through 21-22. That covered a variety of service as set out at the bottom of page 213. Some small amounts that were refunded in relation to trade waste customers for missed collections, some items of refunds for garden waste permits after we had some issues with the service, a bulky waste customer refunded £17 for a missed collection that didn't happen, and also a couple of customers offered £30 compensation for errors in council tax processes. The largest one of the £561 for the £250 payment awarded to the customer due to a slow response with our planning application, and 3 customers in relation to parking fines that were refunded. So not a significant level of compensation, still £560 more than we'd like to have paid out. Breakdown in terms of those is shown in the Appendix A, starting on page 215, together with also where issues we've had with garden waste service, etc., where we've then, rather than paying out compensation, have extended their permits for 1 or 2 months. It just shows a number of those that have been listed as well. And as I said, in 4.5, rather than compensation, one customer accepted some flowers in the parking issue as well. So happy to take any questions from members, Chair.
The first one's an easy one. Obviously, the extension of these permits has a financial implication, but that's not recorded in this document, is it?
It's in section 4.4, it does total them
Okay, sorry,
2,200, but yeah, obviously it doesn't have a cash payment out the door. It just means that their permits have lasted 2 months longer than they would have then renewed. So within the same financial year, we would still end up with the same level of income. It just means that rather than having it this month, we would get it in 2 months' time. So some of those may overlap a financial year, but the majority of them would be, I think it's really see, they run through July right the way through to March 20 to December 21. So they're all within the same financial year, so it won't affect the annual income, just the timing of when we get their renewal.
This reporting of extensions, which seems very good, and I understand the team are working hard at overcoming these problems. So these are quite historic, aren't they, being back in 21. I wonder whether it would help if the number of extensions that service users have given to departments such as planning be recorded and reported to this meeting. Because I understand that at present they are asking service users within the planning system consistently and regularly for extensions on the time frame that the council is not meeting. And I think that would be a very good metric for the governance committee to scrutinise. I wonder if the chief exec would be able to say that that is something that could come to this meeting, and it is something that we would accurately be allowed to scrutinise.
I think you see that information anyway on the quarterly performance reports. It has the national indicator, so that's the number of applications that are dealt with within the statutory time period. The statutory time period is the 8 weeks or 16 weeks, or as agreed with the client through an extension. But we've also added some further information in there to show what percentage is dealt with within the 8 weeks or the 16 weeks pure, the pure 8 weeks or 16 weeks. So you are now getting that information as a committee.
I'd like to see that as a specific agenda item and allow the lead member of senior management to address this. So I've spoken to him recently. He understands the situations. He doesn't make apologies. He sees them as, if there's a failing, that's something that needs to be solved. It's where changes need to be made rather than a negative, which I think is a good way to look at the situation. But I personally would like to see that brought to governance as a specific agenda item, and also the matters of staffing, which we have had issues with resignations and cancelled resignations, and how increased communication could perhaps make people feel like they don't need to quit, or they don't need to quit before you engage in a conversation about how they feel about their job. I think that ties in well with the push from the Health and Safety Executive about mental health and all of the changes that we're doing there. It might also be nice Human Resources to come along and tell us about the changes they're making in line with the Health and Safety Executive's view towards mental health.
I think regarding the planning issue, there's no reason why in a future agenda we cannot ask the head of planning to come and give us a report on that person. So I mean, that would be to get an update on the situation, or where we're meeting, where we're not meeting. So I don't think the clerk can just put a note down to
I'd be grateful to discuss with you, the metrics which we, potentially could ask him in advance, so he could bring that data to the meeting.
Chair, it would be useful probably to compare that data with other local authorities, because I wouldn't want members to feel that the use of extensions of time is unusual to this district council. It's common across all planning authorities. Whether that information is easily obtainable from other districts, I'm not sure, but certainly it's information that's come in to you as part of the performance report. So yeah, if you want to look at that separately, then that's within the remit.
It's on a performance report. We can just get in and just ask for an update
I
on
mean,
that.
I'd like to see all our departments, getting the same glowing reports, from, as we've just seen from Grant Thornton, that why can't we be the best in the country? And I think that everyone at this meeting would like to see that, you know, we're not necessarily, you know, we're setting the bar. We're not following the bar. And I think that we can do that. I do believe that we can find a balance.
And I think we are given the sort of current climate, but we have something we can add on to the agendas. I'm just going to bring Councillor Walker in. Councillor Walker.
Yeah, it's a fairly minor point really, but where you've granted extensions on the green waste, does that mean that then they carry on paying that year on year, a couple of months later, otherwise?
Yeah, so they're in a sense, their renewal date has just been extended. So due to run out at the end of September, it will now run out at the end of the year.
Doesn't cause any issues for the department.
It's a date that rather than getting a reminder now, we'll get the reminder in 2 months from. Yeah, just going back to Councillor Bushell's point, obviously the value for money, or that obviously the auditors do look at, does look at all service areas, so it covers our use of not just money, but our use of resources. So that includes things like staffing uses as well. So I think when members receive that, and that hopefully shows a positive reflection on the council, then that is incorporating the service areas and the resources within those service areas, including staffing.
It'll be good because at Devon County, they have what they call spotlight reviews. So certain areas that are really current at the moment, see if there's any way that things can improve or can we do things better. And that might be something useful. But we have done it in the past. We've called heads of service here and request for various people, so that'll be good. Right, so actually, in the run of things, with the size of the council's budget, £561 is not bad. I think that's really, really a good thing, and it's a good figure. Although, yes, we'd like it to be zero, but in the scheme of things, the size of this council and how rural we are geographically compared to a lot of the city councils, I don't think that's a too bad a figure. However, we've always got room for improvement. So can we have a mover that we note the report, please? Councillor Phillips, secondly Councillor Walker, all in favour? Thank you very much. Item 12, audit recommendation, tracker pages 219 to 224, report by Chief Executive Ken Miles.
Thank you, Chair, and this is your usual report. Table B contains the audit recommendations that have been completed since the last audit committee. You'll see there's quite a few there listed. Happy to answer any questions on those ones rather than just go through them all individually. Table C then contains the outstanding audit recommendations where a request for a revised date has come in from the head of service. And again, you'll see there's quite a few this time, unfortunately. Some of them are requesting dates in the next month or two, some for the 1st of January, just to finalise particular issues. So, for instance, the testing of the business resumption plans, the first one, the request is for a 1st of January extension, which should be 23 rather than 22. So there's a slight typo there, I'm afraid. But you'll see from the note that progress is well underway with those testing, with that testing, and some testing has taken place already. Again, I'm happy to go answer any questions as best I'm able to on these ones, rather than go through them all individually. And And that's it, Chair. So we've got the two tables, B and C. Oh, on table E, Chair, sorry, is the annual governance statement. So we've got actions under table E which have recently completed, and some where there's a request for a revised date. And those are actions that came from previous versions of the annual governance statement, which you noted earlier.
Councillor Bushy?
May I request that the chief executive goes through individually all of those extensions and explain why extensions have been requested?
We've got the notes.
We've got the notes from the various
Yeah,
people.
I'd like to hear from the chief executive with his side information. It's not a new thing for me to want to scrutinise these. I have previously asked the heads of departments to come and explain the extensions that they're going in their absence. I think it would be correct if the chief exec represented those departments on their behalf.
Chair, you have the notes in front of you. I can try and answer some of those.
Is there any specific
questions.
ones, Councillor Bushy? Because I think it's unfair to ask to go through all the lot. Prior to a meeting, you've not notified me that you wanted to do that, so I can bring it up in the chair
I
meeting.
think I've made it clear that I'd like explanations made. I've repeatedly asked that the departments in which they are requesting extensions, those heads of departments come and explain the extensions. I think it's fair and consistent. If the chief exec decides that he doesn't wish to represent those departments, then he can refuse.
Yeah. Is there any particular one that you particularly got some concerns about?
Chair, there's a few that are obviously quite short dated. I think the general context between quite a few of them is where those service areas have had other things placed on them. So government have obviously asked services to do other things. So like housing, for example, been asked to sort of do things around refugee schemes, homes for Ukraine, etc. Some of the other work that our environmental health and emergency officers have been involved in have meant that we've had to reprioritise certain pieces of work. So obviously things around service resumption plans, where those officers have then been involved in other pieces of work that government has obviously sent our way, have meant that certain things have been pushed back slightly. So I think where we've got short dated ones that mean that the original target date has moved maybe 5-6 months. The main reason behind a lot of those is where officers have had to park certain pieces of work because government have then asked officers to then carry out other pieces of work that obviously have taken a high priority. So that's happened in certain areas where we've had to pay out business grants, do things like council tax energy rebate payments, housing officers I've touched on. So I think where there's a general theme of where sort of some have been extended by just a matter of a couple of months, that's the general reason why they've been delayed. A lot of them have got notes which obviously do explain why there's been some small delays. So I think that is the general reason why a lot of them have moved a couple of months. I think that's probably a general reason. There are obviously more individual reasons, but they are set out in the notes. But can go through them if you want to, Chair. It's,
Can I just add, Chair, as well, that some of the actions relate to cyber security, and we've got that under part B there.
Yeah, just to mention, about these extensions and revised dates, because I've been on the council for a few number of years, and I'm sure our chief exec would scrutinise these requests, and any requests that were unreasonable would be challenged, and that's why these things need to happen. And any reasonable request, it might be other mitigating factors that mean an extension is required, would be given that permission. So, I don't think there's anything major going on here. I think there are legitimate reasons why sometimes you do need, and they're listed, you do need to have those areas extended.
If we can just make one note, Ken, from that, is when they are requesting dates.
Yeah.
To make sure that they don't think that, I can do this by January, and then, what I'm trying to say is basically, give themselves time.
Yes.
Otherwise, it looks like they keep coming back asking for extensions. And if it's 4, then, you know, maybe realistically it needs to be 6, because obviously we do some of these schemes that I mentioned, like the refugee scheme and all the other things that are coming in, they knew at that time, and it might be that we've asked them at the wrong time without them knowing how long it would take that they put these dates. So it might be an idea to sort of like be more realistic in the date, so then when they do, you know, it'll be completed and it won't be one of these actions.
Well, yeah, and to take that one step further back, Chair, I mean, what we've said to heads of service is that when they are providing management responses to audit recommendations, and they need to be realistic with the timescales at that stage as well, so that they don't start appearing on this audit report. And I think I'm correct in saying that over the last few cycles, the number of outstanding actions has been substantially reduced, and it's this report for some reason where we've got a number coming through.
Yeah.
But as John said, a number of them, and I gave the example at the outset, are ones where they're asking for a short extension of time, and work is pretty much underway to complete it, and it is just to get it completed. There are a couple of examples in there where I should mention it because otherwise we'll be out of time on it, where just trying to find it now, where we've asked for an extension until, I think there's one for the 26th of September, which is obviously today. Yeah, it was about testing emergency plans. That will drop by a week, and that's purely because of the time that was spent by the emergency planning officer on the Operation London Bridge plans last week.
Yeah. And so our training, council's training as well.
Yeah.
To be possible.
Yeah. So on that particular one, I'd ask you to ignore the 26th of September and ask for a date of the, what was it, 3rd of October, I think, isn't it?
That is to actually thank the service leaders, particularly in housing and in and the staff in housing and finance for their very prompt attention to the refugees coming in from Ukraine. Reading on the internet on the groups that are supporting Ukrainians here. Devon is by far the best council at getting people's money out to them in a good time. And that really,
That is good to know, Councillor Walker. And John said about the challenges in that particular team. They're quadrupled, if you like, because not only are they dealing with Ukrainian refugees, they're now dealing with asylum dispersal, the potential for Hong Kong refugees, and a number of other resettling schemes as well that the government are introducing. So particularly challenging times in that area.
Chair? Do you mind if I just put in that I think good practice would be that the high and medium recommendations are highlighted so that the audit committee can really focus on those. It's obviously particularly high risk areas that you need to be interested in. So, you know, just future reports clearly sort of highlight those, and so that you've got a better awareness of the risk of the area.
I think what would help members as well is a bit like you do in your reports with the arrows up. You know, has there been any progress, amber, or is it red to flag? You know, those sort of things. So going forward about which ones categorising these, what we see as an high risk, these which ones that we see is actually on track, and there's a flat. So actually, when we are scrutinising, we know that that's no risk to the council really. It's just a more of a procedural risk. And the good point that Paul. So maybe you could work the officers on that.
Yeah, I mean, we've had discussions earlier about improving the clarity of the report so that there's more focus on because this is, I mean, going back to a point that a member made earlier about not spending a lot of time on these reports. This is a sort of almost like a SPA derived report, which doesn't necessarily provide the clearest report in terms of what recommendations are and so on. But yeah, a bit more focus on providing clarity about what recommendations are open and overdue and so on would be useful.
Yeah, it would be. Right, members, so we've got this here in front of us. Councillor Wilson.
Yes, I'd like to repeat that. I think that specifically the service heads, when they're expecting or asking for an extension, they come to this committee, so we're able to scrutinise that. And I'd also like to register my disappointment that the chief executive has been felt unable to speak on these extensions individually. But I thank Deputy Chief Exec for his explanations.
Thank you for that, but I mean, at the end of the day, it's your points have been noted.
Thank you.
So can we have a proposal that we note the report and agree the
right.
extension?
And agree the extensions, which I think are reasonable in the circumstances, given the difficulties which we experience at this time with staffing, not only in North Devon, but across the entire local government sector. I work from the local authorities, people will know this is not where we would wish to be as a local authority, but there is progress on every one of these I've seen over the last 3 or 4 years. And I think the average time that people are asking for is coming down significantly. So I'm happy with what's been done.
Yeah.
Happy to second.
All those in favour? Work programme 22-23, pages 245, 248, under item 13. To discuss work programme attached. Members, you've got it in front of you.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier the issue that Councillor Bushell raised about the planning applications, 8 weeks, exactly. You could programme that into one of your future meetings.
Yeah. John, given all the other financial information we have, where do you think that would be best to put in within that?
That could come into your 15th November meeting, Chair.
Yeah.
Be appropriate. The 15th November meeting. We haven't got any items, you put your normal half-yearly report. If we've had all the questionnaires filled in, we should be able to bring the review of the committee's effectiveness that's due. Just need to check that everyone's filled in their questionnaires, which I think most have now. And then you've got your normal standing items. There's the update report that Simon was bringing on if there's been any investigations, but again, that shouldn't be a big report untimely. So you've got your normal standing items. So I think you've got enough room to bring the planning one on with.
Yeah, so let's have the planning one on then at the next meeting.
Yeah.
When would it be possible for or correct for HR to bring forwards their work towards mental health at the workplace? Because I understand that's ongoing at the moment, following government or HSE highlighting of it. I think it would be very important for us to see how that's going to be implemented. Probably interesting for members.
An update report in terms of what the council are doing in terms of
Yes,
mental health awareness and
Yeah.
webinars that we're doing.
and how we collect data. Obviously, I've just completed
Maybe we could just
BSc in psychology, so I would be interested to hear how we're doing that, as to whether we could maybe input things that.
Are you more enlightened on this because you've done the course?
No, mental health in the workplace, I think, is something that's been ignored for far too long. I think that money is tight, certainly in this authority, and so staff well-being is something that we could offer to retain staff.
We can have a look to see whether we can bring it to this committee or whether it's a policy development thing, but the work that's underway at the moment through the organisational development theme, I think is probably what Councillor Bushell was talking about. Just to allay your fears, Councillor Bushell, when you say that mental health in the workplace has been ignored, that's not the case here.
Not in this one, but in general, that's why I'm following the
Yeah,
HSE and their moves towards.
It certainly hasn't been the case here, but there is a theme of work that is developed under the programmes the members put in place, one of which is the organisational development theme, where we have a number of work streams in place around supporting people especially at the moment through cost of living, etc., etc. But we have conducted various training exercises with managers, etc., so they recognise any mental health issues. And we have a programme of support in place for employees that are suffering mental health issues as well. So we have that in place. I mean, perhaps the best thing is to send members the organisational development programme so that you can see what work is undertaken, and then if you feel that it needs to be put into the work programme for this committee to look at it again in more detail, you can do. That's work that's underway and that's been approved by Strategy and Resources
Yeah,
Committee.
I think without knowing the detail, I think if you can send it out to members, we can arrange for that.
It's a good starting point, so you can see the background to what's going on.
If I'm to be more specific, I think the way we work questions going to members of staff would be interesting to us, and how we justify the validity of the data that we collect and the methods that we use to collect it. Specifically, I think I overlooked possibly by the fact that you're achieving something, but from the point of mental health, how you achieve that is very different, and you can pose the data collection method in a way where you may not notice that the data is being skewed, but it will be skewed. So I think that is important for us to have a look at.
I think first of all, we need to know what has been done. Because it might be sufficient, but and if we're not satisfied, then we can add it into the work programme. So can we just ask you to send out what you're going to send, and then we can have a look at that. And then we will put the planning into the November meeting, if we can get the planning to come along to that.
Yeah.
And look at those stats. And that, I think, will be okay.
Ken, could you send out details of, questionnaires or however we gather data from members of staff as well, so we can scrutinise those documents?
You're on about staff questionnaires, aren't you, things like that?
Well, yeah, I mean, in relevance to mental health and those staff surveys.
Well, we probably don't do the questionnaires from a purely academic point of view. The way that we've worded our questionnaires is to work with staff on the actual wording. So we have an organisational development group, and that group have helped to form any questionnaires that have gone out. It's not a sort of academic exercise, it's being done with the staff so that the staff have an input into what questions are being asked and how they're being asked.
So you're listening to staff, we're showing that we're listening to staff and what they want.
Yeah.
And I think, Matt, we need to take that away now. I think
I think
mental health is very important. It's
we-
been taken very seriously by this council, and I think now we're going into specifics. That's for later on. We just need to get some information.
Mr. Chair,
I'd rather move on
with respect, I think that actually those who might be experiencing mental health would be the ones who wouldn't volunteer themselves for asking questions or how the questions are worded. So I think, unless it is not the duty of the members of this committee, I would ask that those,
I think some of those
at least be circulated, not the answers, but the questions be
But I
circulated
think some
to
of
us.
those are personal and individual to people who might have those mental health problems and may not even wish us as a committee to discuss those. But I think later on, the actual structures and organisations in place, we wait for the report to come through. So can I have a proposal that we accept the work plan, councillor Walker? Or councillor Lugar, all in favour?
With the additions.
But yeah. Right, that is absolutely. Now, exclusion of the press and restrictions of documents.
Sorry, Chair, I can't get on to part B.
You can't go to part B.
Yeah.
Right, so I just have to read something out first, please. We have now reached the point in the agenda where the committee will formally move into part B to consider those items which are not for consideration within the public domain. At this point, any members of the public or press are politely requested to leave the meeting for consideration of the remaining items on the agenda. Following the consideration of the final two items in part B. The meeting will be officially closed by myself. I will now ask the clerk to please stop the recording and thank you all for attending the meeting this evening.